Welcome to the channel History for the Night. Here we journey into the past so that you can drift off to sleep gently and with a touch of knowledge. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the like button, because by the end of this lecture, you'll already be fast asleep. Close your eyes, for the story is about to begin. The name of Nostradamus is familiar to almost everyone. Even those who have never opened his books or read his mysterious quatrains still know the name as a symbol of prophecy, a mark of the foretold future. In newspapers and magazines, on television, and across the internet, the phrase echoes again and again. Nostradamus spoke of this. His quatrains are quoted before wars and revolutions, before epidemics and disasters, whenever humanity feels the sharp sting of fear about tomorrow. But who was he really? A mysterious prophet to whom the future was revealed, or a man of the Renaissance, a physician and astrologer, who, instead of mystical gifts, possessed a sharp understanding of the fears and moods of his age? Why do lines written nearly 500 years ago still capture the imagination of millions? There are two sides to the image of Nostradamus. The first is the legend, created by time and countless interpreters. According to this legend, he foresaw the deaths of French kings, world wars, revolutions, the rise of Hitler, the fall of the Twin Towers in New York, and even the pandemics of the 21st century. The second side is the real man, who lived in 16th century France, surrounded by plague, religious wars, and the looming threat of the Inquisition. His texts are filled with hints, anagrams, metaphors, and shadowy descriptions. And it is precisely because of this ambiguity that they so easily bend to any event. Throughout this lecture, we will return to the central question: was Nostradamus truly a prophet who glimpsed the secrets of the future? Or was he a writer and observer who chose his words so carefully that they became timeless? This lecture is not only a story about his life, but also an attempt to understand why. 500 years later, we still open his quatrains, search for answers within them, and see reflected there our own fears and hopes. The man we know as Nostradamus was born Michel de Nostradam. To some, he was a prophet who foresaw the fate of nations. To others, he was simply a physician, an astrologer, and a man deeply rooted in the fears of his century. What makes him remarkable is not only what he wrote, but how he wrote. His works, mysterious, poetic, and veiled in ambiguity, turned him into a symbol of prophecy. Some saw in him a man who spoke with heaven. Others, a master observer who clothed the anxieties of his age in timeless words. To understand Nostradamus, we must step back into 16th century France. From a distance, we remember it as an age of Renaissance. Artists, poets, explorers, new books, and ideas. But for the people who lived through it, the world was far less romantic. It was a time of fear. Europe was still haunted by the shadow of the Middle Ages. New ideas of science and humanism had begun to spread, yet daily life remained harsh. The plague, the Black Death, returned in waves, wiping out whole neighborhoods in weeks. Narrow streets filled with smoke from burning belongings, the toll of funeral bells, and cries of grief became the soundtrack of life. Doctors were powerless. To ordinary people, the disease seemed divine punishment. France was torn by wars and would soon collapse into bloody conflict between Catholics and Huguenots. The Inquisition's fires reminded everyone that a single wrong thought could cost one's life. And above all, there was the apocalyptic fear of the end of the world. Signs in the sky, comets, blood moons, every disaster read as a message of doom. It was into this world that Michel de Nostradam was born in 1503 in the small Provençal town of Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. Michel's family had Jewish roots, though they had converted to Christianity to avoid persecution, a common story of survival in that era. His father worked as a notary, respected and well off enough to provide comfort. From an early age, Michel showed a gift for study. He loved languages, literature, mathematics, astronomy, and above all, medicine. He first studied in Avignon, then at the great medical university of Montpellier, one of Europe's most advanced centers of learning. There he encountered the belief, common at the time, that the stars influenced human health. Physicians studied both anatomy and astrology, convinced that the heavens and the human body were linked. After completing his studies, Nostradamus traveled widely as a physician. He devoted much of his work to combating outbreaks of plague. Unlike many of his contemporaries, who relied on prayer or crude potions, Nostradamus promoted surprisingly practical advice. Ventilate homes, wash hands, change bedding, avoid stagnant water. He did not know of microbes, yet his emphasis on cleanliness and fresh air saved lives. Even more, he became known for his courage. While others fled from infected towns, he stayed and treated the sick. But while he saved many, he could not save his own. While Nostradamus was away helping other towns, plague struck his home. His wife and 2 young children died. He could not return in time. This devastation haunted him. For years afterward, he wandered, a physician but also a seeker. He immersed himself in ancient texts, in astrology, alchemy, and mystical writings. It was as if he was no longer searching only for cures of the body, but for answers to the fate of humankind itself. Eventually, Nostradamus settled in Salon de Provence, remarried, and began a new family. He continued his medical work, wrote books and calendars, and became respected as both doctor and scholar. But his deepest work turned toward prophecy. His mind, scarred by plague and loss, sought to understand the forces shaping the world. Why so much suffering? Why so much tragedy? Was it all predetermined? Could the future be known? In 16th century Europe, astrology was considered a serious science. Learned men believed the stars influenced harvests, health, even kingdoms. Nostradamus threw himself into these studies, poring over ancient works by Ptolemy and Arabic scholars. He began to publish calendars filled with weather forecasts, agricultural advice, and astrological predictions. These brought him recognition, but he also knew the dangers. Prophecies could be judged heretical. To protect himself, Nostradamus disguised his predictions in poetry, so he invented a style uniquely his own. The quatrains, 4 lines, written in a mixture of French, Latin, Occitan, even Italian. They were riddled with metaphors, anagrams, and symbols. Obscure enough to seem safe, yet powerful enough to stir imagination. Nostradamus believed the universe was an interconnected system where celestial bodies guided earthly events. The sun might represent kings, the moon the people, comets disaster, rivers nations. His writings blurred science, poetry, and myth. He drew on classical history, comparing contemporary rulers to Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great. He wove in biblical imagery, blood, fire, ruined cities, apocalyptic visions straight from Revelation. This fusion gave his quatrains their enduring power. They felt both scholarly and sacred, rational and mystical. His great work, Les Centuries, The Centuries, was meant to contain 10 books, each with 100 quatrains, 1,000 visions of the future. In the end, the work was unfinished. Fewer than 1,000 quatrains survive. Yet that incompleteness only added to the mystery. The quatrains stood alone, fragments of vision. Together, they formed a mosaic. Not a story, but a kaleidoscope of possible futures. Their vagueness was their strength. They could be applied to any age, any crisis. Nostradamus's fame grew when his quatrains seemed to mirror real events. The most famous concerned the death of King Henry II of France. In 1559, during a tournament in Paris, Henry faced Gabriel de Montgomery. In their joust, Montgomery's lance pierced the king's helmet, driving splinters into his eye. Henry died in agony days later. One quatrain read, "A young lion will overcome the old. On the field of combat in single fight. In a golden cage he will pierce his eye. 2 wounds as one, then he dies a cruel death. The resemblance was uncanny. Henry, the older man, wore a golden-adorned helmet, a cage. His eye was pierced. He died painfully. To contemporaries, this was proof. Nostradamus became the prophet of France. Even Queen Catherine de' Medici sought his counsel. Centuries later, interpreters found in Nostradamus hints of Napoleon. One quatrain mentions strange names: Pau, Ney, Loron. To readers of the 16th century, these seem to be obscure towns. But in the 19th, commentators claim they formed an anagram of Napoleon. The quatrain spoke of a man of humble birth who would rise through war to dominate Europe. The parallels with Napoleon Bonaparte were irresistible. Born on Corsica, from modest origins, yet crowned emperor and conqueror across the continent. Skeptics argued the words could mean anything, that many leaders could fit the description. Yet in the age of Napoleon's wars, the belief that Nostradamus had foreseen him spread like wildfire. Even more controversial was the quatrain that many associate with the name of Hitler. In it appeared the word Hister. At first glance, the difference from the dictator's surname is minimal, just a single letter. The text speaks of a great leader who would come from the depths of Europe, whose power would spread to the east, and before whom nations would tremble in fear. When, during the Second World War, millions witnessed the brutality of the Nazi regime, Nostradamus's lines were given new life. It seemed as though he had named outright the man who became the embodiment of 20th century evil. Newspapers published these prophecies, films and broadcasts quoted the quatrains, and the Allies even used them in their propaganda, claiming that Hitler's downfall had been foretold. Yet here, too, lies a point of controversy. Hister is, in fact, the Latin name for the Danube, the great river of Central Europe. In ancient sources, this word was used to describe the regions along the Danube. Thus, Nostradamus may not have been speaking of a man named Hitler at all, but rather of some danger arising from those lands. Only later, when the world came to know the name of the German dictator, did people see a prophecy in the text. Skeptics argue that we see in the quatrains what we wish to see. If Hitler had never existed, no one would have thought to link the word Hester to a name. But after the war, the coincidence seemed too striking, and faith in the prophecy only grew stronger. In both the case of Napoleon and the case of Hitler, we encounter the same problem. Nostradamus' prophecies are written in such vague and multi-layered language that they can be interpreted in dozens of ways. When great events unfold, people open his book and find lines that appear to match. Yet these matches are born out of ambiguity. At the same time, one cannot deny that it was precisely such quatrains that made Nostradamus a legend. Had he written only of weather or harvests, he would long ago have been forgotten. But the verses in which people saw the fates of Napoleon and Hitler became enduring symbols of his foresight. Catastrophes always occupied an important place in the prophecies of Nostradamus. His contemporaries lived in a world where disasters were part of everyday life. Fires destroyed cities. Epidemics wiped out entire generations. The earth shook, and rivers overflowed their banks. For a person of the 16th century, all this seemed like signs of divine wrath, harbingers of the end times. It is therefore not surprising that the centuries contain so many lines about destruction, blood, and suffering. The most famous example of such a prophecy is the quatrain associated with the Great Fire of London in the year 1666. In it, there is mention of the city of the Great Fire and of the number 66. These words appeared obscure to Nostradamus' contemporaries, but after the tragedy, which struck more than a century later, they sounded like revelation. On the night of the 2nd to the 3rd of September 1666, a bakery on Pudding Lane in London caught fire. Due to dry weather and strong winds, the flames spread rapidly. Over the course of 3 days, almost the entire central part of the city was consumed. More than 13,000 houses were destroyed, nearly 90 churches, including St. Paul's Cathedral. Thousands were left homeless, and the city lay in ruins. When the flames subsided and the losses were counted, someone remembered Nostradamus's lines. The city of the great fire and the number 66 seemed like an obvious reference to this disaster. Many believed the prophecy had come true with exactness, yet doubts remain here as well. In Nostradamus's quatrains, images of fire and the destruction of cities appear again and again. References to the number 66 can be interpreted in different ways. It might point to the year 1566, or simply symbolize the number of the beast from the apocalypse. But in the public imagination, the coincidence was so vivid that from this moment on, the prophecies of catastrophes became firmly embedded in the legend of Nostradamus. The story of Nostradamus is the story of a man who straddled two worlds, the healer who battled plague and the poet who peered into the stars. He lost a family, endured tragedy, and sought answers not just in medicine, but in the mysteries of fate itself. His prophecies endure, not because they are precise, but because they are vague. In that vagueness, every generation has found its own fears reflected. Wars, epidemics, disasters. Perhaps the true power of Nostradamus was not in predicting the future, but in capturing the timeless human longing to know it. Even today, as we close our eyes with his words echoing in the background, we realize the riddle of Nostradamus is the riddle of ourselves.